So very warm welcome to you, Rome. Thank you so much for joining the Karma Summit. Thank you for your time and inputs, and welcome to the Karma Summit.
Thank you so much for having me, man. I wish I could physically be there. Wish we all could physically be there, man.
Yep. These are certainly very unprecedented times. Would love to have done this physically, but also the
Yeah.
virtual thing helps us, do it even when we are in different cities. So welcome so much, and thank you for joining us.
Yes, of course.
Great. So the first question, which I wanted to ask you is that, you have a very diverse background, coming from Afro-Cuban and Irish heritage, born and brought up in America. Uh, how has this shaped your thought process and approach to life over the years? And, you went through a lot of challenges before getting to the stage where you are. So would love to understand your journey and the different perspectives and challenges that you have seen through the diverse background you had.
Yeah, I'm black and also Cuban and Irish descent,
Hmm.
but as perceived in America and perceived where I grew up, which is Chicago, Illinois,
Hmm.
um, I was perceived as just black. So
Hmm.
I grew up within the lens of what that was. You know what
Hmm.
I mean? So
Hmm.
my experience with everything across the board, from law enforcement or community or people where I grew up at, that's generally how people saw me.
Hmm. Hmm.
And what I found is I grew up in a rough neighborhood in Chicago.
Hmm.
I spent a lot of time not really knowing that I was in a impoverished situation,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think that goes to the testament of how amazing, not just my mother, but mothers are that have to
Yeah.
deal with
Hmm.
uh, the complexity of raising children in an environment that doesn't really aid them. So for
Yeah.
me, I didn't know that I had without,
Yeah.
and I mean, obviously now, I recognize what that is. So,
Mm.
but what it does is the reason that I ended up kind of being in this creative lane, which is what I do across the board, whether it's art, music, or acting, or whatever it is. What happens is that when you grow up in an environment that is not giving, and you have to kind of create your own
Yeah.
existence
Hmm.
or create a future for yourself, there's a connective tissue between if you look across the board with actors or athletes
Yeah.
who are really excelling in their field or
Mm.
respective fields, the LeBron James,
Yeah.
the people who didn't have both parents growing up in their homes.
Hmm.
There's a connective tissue between the creativity and the overall ambition and drive. You know, the want to be great is kind of connected with the fact that you had to grow up without,
Got it.
and a lot of kids in these neighborhoods, like I used to be, and like LeBron used to be, um, maybe they don't grow up to be 6 feet 8 inches tall, so their landscape of opportunities
Yeah.
is a little bit limited, and also because of that reason alone, you know, they're not really exposed to what they could be possibly doing. So for me, I think at a young age, I had to think outside the box, and I always kind of was the outsider,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
the black sheep,
Yeah.
because I thought so differently, and I thought so big,
Hmm.
and I thought so largely outside of what I physically could see, that it was a little bit like taboo. You know what I mean? It was a
Yeah.
bit strange
Yeah.
because I always wanted these kind of larger than
Mm.
life kind of things. And growing up, it was difficult,
Yeah.
growing up and trying to navigate my interest. I think for a long time, I never really told people that I knew how to sing. And I think the environment that I grew up in, or that I was even interested in the arts. And I think that's where we kind of have to start
Yeah.
when we try to cultivate young people into being able to expand into these spaces that they want to be in, but they can't really address it because in the environment that they live in, it's not really suitable.
Got
It
it.
wasn't really super cool for me to sing, or really cool for me
Mm.
to play guitar where I grew up, you know.
Yeah.
So the people that I looked up to and other people looked up to were the people who were maybe drug dealers or people who were basketball players. So I had a lot of pushback on what that was, you know. And now you see people come out of everywhere and say, hey, man, I remember you used to want to do those things, and
Yeah.
they forget how they treat you. But that's the difficult part, because a lot of times kids have these natural ambitions to want to do things that are outside the box and are creative and are original because of their circumstance and need to be able to escape their physical reality. And because of where they are, they don't really have the opportunity to cultivate those things. And so for me individually, I had to work really hard at hiding those things, but also giving effort and energy to those things, you know. So growing up, I looked up to my mom, you know. I looked up to the strong women in my life because my father really wasn't around. And without a strong family structure, there's good and bad, you know. Like without my father being around, I kind of grew up really quick, and I understood the world at a very young age, and the innocence of all the things that kids normally should be able to have. I really didn't have. Like, I didn't really the opportunity to be like, hey, you know, Tooth Fairy or Santa Claus, those kind of things I didn't really get to live in, you know. And because of that reason, it kept me grounded as a young adult at a very young age, and helped me kind of want to pursue what I'm doing now. So there's a balance, you know, because I think that had I grown up in a structured family, I don't know if I would have had the creative drive to want to do what I do now. You know, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of people who do have that family structure who end up doing this work, but more so times than not, there's that connective thing with figuring it out and wanting a lot more, that in other ways you create this stuff for yourself. So it's kind of what I did, like navigating growing up.
No, those are, you know, very, very important points you mentioned. You know, especially the first piece you mentioned was, you know, you were an outlier in a way, and maybe there are some you know, children who grew up in an environment where being an outlier was encouraged, and you know, you were a star because you were an outlier. And there are certain places where, you know, you are an outlier and you are, you know, not encouraged but almost discouraged, and you know, saying that, you know, why are you doing these things, you're not supposed to do these things. So I think there is you know, you put in a lot of I would say a lot of efforts and hard work, but it's also a lot of mental you know, strength you need to be you know, able to stick to what you want to do and keep at it, even if the environment doesn't, you know, facilitate or encourage you to do it. So, like, you know, kudos to you, and it's great to you know, hear from you. Another point you mentioned was that, you know, many kids or children don't even know what is the right thing to have, because their exposure is limited to a very small thing, and they don't just know what they should aspire for, what the world is, you know, how can they grow. So and there are some who may know that but don't have the access to resources. So there is the lack of access to information or exposure, and then there is a lack of access to resources. And you know, you have, you know, navigated both the things. So one is just the exposure and the resources, and making it, you know, really big. So what has been, you know, your learnings around that, and how can we change this? I mean, this is just not right. Every kid needs to have the right amount of exposure and access, so that, you know, whatever merits or demerits that they have, the society actually empowers them in the right way. So what has been your learnings, and how can we make this equitable access and exposure to everyone?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, man. I think there's a couple of key, I would say, key points to what you're asking, and one of them is visibility. You know, I think that as humans, we need to see things to visualize them.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, and for me, I grew up in an environment where I felt like I was trapped and stuck in my circumstance, which a lot of
Mm-hmm.
kids do.
Mm-hmm.
And so their landscape is very limited and short.
Mm-hmm.
So if they do have these aspirations of not even just, I mean, it doesn't even have to be acting or anything art
Mm-hmm.
related or
Mm-hmm.
anything that's kind of not aligned with the perspective of what you should, that people kind of feel like you should,
Mm-hmm.
anything along those lines. I think that we kind of have to start at the the family structure.
Mm-hmm.
And the family structure is important, and not necessarily if you have two parents, because kids don't have the opportunity to choose what that is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if there are parents out there who are raising children alone, or even if you do have someone else in the home with you, it's important to encourage these uh, ambitions, whether they lead to something or not. Because what happens is that they lay dormant, and then they become nothing. Those dreams just wither away,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, we start to get into a place where kids get stuck in a position where they're being kind of sifted to a certain direction. And the only way we can really grow and move as a community, as a culture,
Mm-hmm.
is to allow kids to explore these things. I mean, if you go back and look at certain points in history, and people who have created things that are helping us in our
Mm-hmm.
days now,
Mm-hmm.
they were a little bit off the wall. Einstein was a little bit off the wall. These guys who really walk to the beat of their own drum.
Yeah.
But I think that we don't have to go that route. I don't think it needs to be that eccentric. I think that if we normalized these feelings, if we normalize it being okay to want to do things that are a little bit
Mm-hmm.
outside of the
Yeah.
spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
I think that it would engage kids and young adults in a way that it would help them pursue ultimately what would make them happy.
Yeah.
And the very first things a lot of times is not the thing that's going to make you
Yeah.
happy. I wanted to be, I wanted to be an astronaut, obviously, growing up, and that's not something that I'm doing now.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the family structure environment where you're able to explore these things, whether you fail in them or not,
Mm-hmm.
and allow kids to be vulnerable. And it's really hard because, especially in Black communities, it's difficult to navigate these feelings, but also, to navigate certain aspects that kids go through, like depression,
Mm-hmm.
the mental aspect of it, mental health, I think, is another thing that's a little bit not spoken on, and sort of like tucked away and hidden away, almost as if, you're not even supposed to have these kind of issues growing up.
Yeah.
A lot of adults like to dismiss children and tell them that they don't have anything on their plate, and say, oh, you don't, well, because compared to what they have,
Yeah.
they feel is minuscule, say, well, no, you're your child. What do you have to worry about? I'm paying bills. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. I'm providing for you. But the mental, as you're a kid, in high school, whatever age you are, those things become very large and very big to you, which is also connective tissue to suicide and other aspects of why kids end up in situations where they feel like the world's against them because they have these feelings, and then they get pushed away. And so one of my points is that we need to kind of start in the family environment, the family atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
If you have kids, to be able to help them and nourish them and kind of provoke them to want to pursue these things, even if they have a little bit interest, because you never know what might happen. I mean, you might be raising a child that is about to cure some disease, but in order for them to get there, they need to be able to navigate these things that they do have interest in first, that will ultimately lead them to where they're supposed to be. So that's one aspect I would say. And the other aspect is also the environment that kids are going to school, and our schooling system, because, believe it or not, the children spend about more than half their time in school as opposed to being at home, especially just being awake. Kids spend 8 hours or so at school, and by the time they get home, maybe it's 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, and then they're going to sleep and waking up and doing the same thing again. So as far as the engagement part of their minds and the engagement part of their personality is more so at school and the people that they're around at school. And so if you are a person of a particular power in school, maybe a teacher, a principal, it's important to try to implement these into the curriculums that you do have there. And I think that in our schooling system across the board, and I can only attest to, you know, what it's like in America,
Yeah.
but it's very much funneled into a kind of a cookie cutter mindset that's basically saying, hey, it's a requirement for you to be here.
Mm.
And what happens to kids is that they start to learn the things that they like at school, right? And the people that they're around.
Mm-hmm.
But what I noticed is that it's not more so what they're learning in class, but they're learning from their classmates.
Yeah.
And they go for the environment of being around the people that they're in class with, you know, as opposed to going to the environment to want to learn and cultivate these tools and things that they do have, you know. I mean, everybody had that certain teacher that they just couldn't wait to be in class with. But just imagine if all of the teachers were in this kind of perspective, that it would create an environment to where kids didn't need to escape within their own classmates, within themselves, but escape and explore these opportunities with their teachers, so that they can grow in these areas, you know, and that's part of what a teacher's job is to provoke these children into to being young adults and to provoke their minds and to think in a forward manner. You know, we need them. We need the kids are the future. You know, we need them to be able to be forward thinkers and not just kind of be cookie cuttered and calculated, formulated in a way where everything is just kind of already set out and mandated for them. By the time they're a senior, they graduate high school, and it's like they're just going according to plan, and they go look back on high school, and they literally can't remember a single thing, but they can remember the people they've been around. So that's another aspect of it, is the schooling environment, and individually, you know, the people who have those powers to help them explore what that is, align with the curriculum that they have, you know, whether it's English, math, whatever it could be, but to just try to normalize these things for these kids, especially when they're at school, because school a lot of times is escape for a lot of kids. You know, and they can't wait to go to school because whether maybe home isn't a great place to be, and school is generally a safe place. You know, so to help kids kind of navigate what that is, you know, I think it's important for our teachers and our leaders in the schooling system to allow kids to just dream, man, and to impact them individually.
So I think the family structure and the point you mentioned about kids feeling safe to be themselves and to express themselves and be feeling safe to share both their successes and failures, feeling safe to experiment, feeling safe to share their weaknesses. I think the family structure or the environment should enable that to happen. And for kids, one is the family and one is the school. So both the ecosystems need to enable that to happen. And school is just not the classroom, but the classmates as well. And if the ecosystem or the environment is positive and good, then the entire collective starts rising up. So it's really interesting to get that perspective from someone who has seen this firsthand. So thanks for sharing that. Just now moving forward to now that you are at this at this level and position, and you're a celebrity, and a lot of people look up to you, and you are the youth icon. But at the same time, there is a lot of responsibility along with all the attention that you get. So and you have been a very strong advocate on some of the most important issues. So what do you think is I would say role or responsibility of youth icons and celebrities because of the sheer power that you have to be able to influence and masses for the better? So would love to understand your perspective and what should celebrities do in general.
I think doing this line of work, the notoriety aspect of it is inevitable. I'm very visible to a lot of people. I've been on TV for about 6 years now, consistently since I started TV, film, whatever it is. But what happens is you end up in a position where you can't really hide, and your privacy kind of slips away.
Mm-hmm.
And so you either become two types of a celebrity. You're one who kind of tries to hide it even longer, or you try to use that experience and use that opportunity to try to cultivate people in what you believe is the right perspective. And for me, you know, I definitely have perspectives on certain things. And once I noticed that people were interested in what I had to say, it provoked me to want to educate them on whatever it is that I did know. Because as a creative, and especially as an actor, you really get put in situations where you have to think as if you're someone else.
Yeah.
And so that helps you, supposed to help you stay grounded and help you recognize, the plight that people go through, especially coming from that. So it's really on the person to want to be engaging. And the advice that I do give to other colleagues of mine or peers of mine is to just get educated. Because the worst thing that can happen is a person with a microphone who isn't educated. And so when you're using that platform and you're not educating people properly or giving them facts that they need, that is kind of what creates this environment where people are misinformed. And now we have people walking around telling other people misinformed information. So my inclination is not to just jump right in and say, yeah, these are my thoughts on things. If you don't have direct experience or you don't know things that are, correlated directly to the situation, I tell them to just, try to be educated and try to come from a position where you definitely have this sort of magnifying glass around you, which is kind of what I call it living under a magnifying glass. Cause every move you make is kind of magnified and everything that you do is people pay attention to. So you have to be less self-aware. And that's the thing, is that in my business, it's a lot of people who are very self-aware and very self-conscious and very aware of what they look like, what they're doing, everything. But you have to really step away from what that is and recognize that people don't live that life that you're living. People don't live under that microscope. People don't understand what that is. So for me, whether I do a lot of lives where I speak on like a plethora of topics, whether it's 10 people in there or thousands of people in there, I just try to tune into what I feel personally about something so that I can give them the truth that I feel like that I'm coming from, and that's really the responsibility of having that platform is huge, and but the thing is that you don't have to get in front of a camera to make an impact. You don't need to get in front of a live or get in front of people. It can be simply as, passing on a link or posting a link to something that is educational or something that can educate your followers. And that's what we need, especially in our environment now, where everything is very divisive. Everything there's a lot of tension in the air, race related. There's a lot of tension with religion. There's a lot of tension with everything right now. And it's very important for our leaders in the communities or leaders on social media, people who have these microphones, I say, to try to educate the followers that don't have that experience of people that are going through the difficult issues right now. There's a lot of people who have followers who are not Black or who are not brown, who don't experience the racism or experience what that's like. So it's important to expose people to what that is and make yourself visible. And I think that if a lot of times there's people who have these platforms who are a little bit afraid to step out and have a position. But I generally say you take a position, or a position will be given to you. Meaning that if you don't take a side on these issues, who for me are very, pun intended, black and white, meaning that one side is good, one side is bad, generally what happens is you get pushed to the side that's bad if you don't really speak out and condemn these things, because history will look back on this and say that you didn't speak and wonder why you didn't speak. You know what I mean? No matter how great you are. And that's one of the, and to kind of segue that's one of the things that sort of held Michael Jordan back in his in his greatness, you know, I mean, he had so many accolades and
Mm.
he conquered the NBA, but the one thing that people really held against him and that really just stood the testament of time is the fact that he didn't speak out during during the racial tension and the racial equality that he lived through, you know, and that I'm sure he had his own experiences with, but him not picking a side and him not being a pioneer really did shift a lot of people's perspectives on him personally, not his talent. He's immensely talented and, you know, very business conscious, but these are the things that people will remember you by. So that being said, if you're in these positions where you have the microphone, it's on you to make that decision. But at the same time, you know, it's sort of your responsibility to make sure that you're navigating your followers into the right path. You know, and it's interesting to see, you know, we see a lot of people who aren't engaging with their followers on things that are happening right now. And it's very apparent that you don't really care about these people, but you really want to just kind of use them in a way that aids you.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that people are now recognizing what that is and recognizing people and kind of pushing them to be a part of the conversation.
Yeah, I think, you know, the thing you mentioned that, you know, not taking a stand is one stand in itself, right? If you're not taking a stand, it means you've taken a conscious call. It's not that you can be neutral. You've taken a conscious call, and I think, as you mentioned, you know, people with microphones have to take conscious calls because you know, so many people look up to them, and you know, if you think of your followers as a family, and you know, as a part of your, you know, larger family, you would actually tell them what is the right thing, at least what you feel what is the right thing, and be open and transparent and expressive on things that matter to you and you think will matter to them. So so like very, very you know, strong and a, you know, deep input. And you know, going further into this, as in you have you know, spoken on the racial justice movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, and the need for reforms, you know, to create more accountability for police departments. Would be good to understand, you know, your thinking and perspective around that.
Yeah, I think the thing now that's happening everywhere, people are just kind of fed up with the disparity of the accountability that a lot of policing doesn't have, you know. So what happens is what we need to do is, and what we recognize now in the deaths of George Floyd and other you know, deaths like his, is that there needs to be an overhaul of the way that we police. And I mean, and it's time, and you guys know, you know, when a business, and you start a business, you don't keep the same philosophy and business practices along through 30, 40-year periods. You know, you reassess and you recognize where things need to be better, and you recognize where things could, you know, we could work on things and make it suitable for the business to flourish and to be successful. And policing is also a business. You know, it's also something that aids the states, also aids the prisons, and also it's supposed to help people. So at a certain point, you should be able to reassess that. And it's not to, you know, I mean, the policing system that we have now is just broken. I mean, it's simple, just simply as that. It doesn't aid the people that it's supposed to aid. And right now, what we need to do is to figure out how we can dismantle the policing practices and build them up individually in the communities. You know, what happens is that there's police officers who grow up in neighborhoods and then they become police officers. And those are the people who should be the voices. Those are the people who should be involved in mandating these communities to help build them up so that we don't have situations that we've been having in America and everywhere, you know. And it's not something that's new. It's just now people have camera phones and now people are pointing and bringing their phones out in this environment now, which up until recently, you know, I remember a time where police officers didn't have to wear a camera. You know what I mean? So, I mean, there's I'm sure there's countless of situations where police weren't held accountable because they didn't have the necessary evidence to prove otherwise. And we're in a situation where our turnover rate and people being arrested and going to jail is extremely high. The percentage of people who cop out in deals are extremely high, and the rate of people going to jail is extremely high. And that's not because people are more guiltier than they were. It's because the accountability. It's because it's much easier for a prosecutor to come to you and say, listen, the state wants to charge you for this and you can get X amount of years, but you can cop out for a deal and maybe get probation. And maybe that seems a little minuscule at the time, but what happens is it really creates this environment where people feel like they don't have a choice. And this is supposed to be about having a choice, especially in America, where it's land of the free. You know, it doesn't feel like it's very free when you don't have an opportunity. And you're telling me the only thing that is keeping you from having this opportunity is economical and financial position. And that in itself is not an environment and not a system that is supposed to aid people, because people can't. I mean, we get attorneys that are appointed to us, but the attorneys that are appointed to us are biased and connected to the prosecutors, you know? So it's not a system into where it's beneficial. It's just a system to get the cases in and move them in and out, move them in and out. And there's about a 90% turnover rate for people who go to jail and then end up copping out for deals. And that's another larger issue. But to this trickle down effect of what that is that in our environments is that we have people who have a plethora of issues that they deal with, right? So if we have someone who has mental illness, we need to make sure in our communities that we don't police them the same way that we police people who are getting calls about domestic violence. You know, I mean, that's just common sense. So if we have people who go through, you know, mental lapses and we recognize what that is, it's the community and the policing department's obligation to send, to create. So this is what I think that we could do individually in our communities, is to dismantle the practices that we've been using in our policing. Also increase our psychological testing when we bring our policing in. I think right now it's extremely low in the amount of time that you need to actually put in to become a police officer. I mean, you become a police officer faster than you become just about any other trade, you know? And we're talking about people who have guns and people who have positions of power and authority. We need to make sure we take the necessary steps as if we were having someone who wanted to become a doctor or become a nurse who have direct opportunity to help lives, right? So you wouldn't rush the process of getting a doctor through getting his, you know, his certificate to become a doctor to just say, hurry up and become a doctor. And now we're in positions where he needs to operate to save a life and he can't because he's not trained right. So it's kind of the same thing to me. So we need to dismantle our practices that we're having in our communities and build them up in the image of what that community is. Get the community leaders involved. You know, in each community, there's people who have nonprofits and people who really lead the community and help the kids and know these people. And that's the thing, the accountability is to know who's in that community. And a lot of times there's policing that comes from different areas of whatever it is, city or state. And then they go and their job is to mandate a community that they don't know anything about. So that's one part of it. And knowing that is like, you're going into an environment that you're not familiar with, and you're already afraid because it's unknown to you. And as history tells us, humans are afraid of what the unknown is. Like when the lights go out, that's why people are afraid. They can't see what's in front of them. They can't label what's in front of them. So it's the same thing, the same psychological mindset with policing. So we need to be able to recognize and also recognize when there are situations where we need to have our policing come. Like, for instance, Minnesota was one that kind of took a position to kind of dismantle their policing. And I think that it's a great thing. And I think what people need to understand is that we're not trying to take away policing. We're trying to re-image policing. We need to rebrand it. We need to build it up in the reflection of the community. And not every community is going to be the same, meaning that if we get calls about a guy who's mentally unstable and clearly mentally unstable and harmless, but it seems a little bit radical and unpredictable, that's not a line you would call to say, hey, we need police. I think there needs to be a separate line in a different department that's connected to the community or connected to the policing, that they would send someone that can help deal with that particular situation. So, and those are across the board. And I think that we need to individually start doing that. And that's the only way we'll really have a fair, policing system in America.
Yeah. I think the point you mentioned about, the system that, the end output, what it was desired to have, the system is not doing that. It's actually leading to, counterproductive output. So there is some fundamental issues in the system, and the least we can do is, have more, empathetic and community-led policing, rather than, a hard rule that this is, policing. It's because you're policing humans and humans are policing humans, and you need to do it in the human way. So it has to be empathetic and community-led. So
we also need to hit one more on that thing I want to add. We also need to give police officers the opportunity to help, to not necessarily just help, but to make sure other police officers are held accountable. And I think there's this kind of brotherhood and unity within policing, which kind of negates that. We need to be able to have an avenue for police officers to keep their coworkers and their peers accountable, meaning that if they see things and practices that they don't like, or if they know of, and this goes back to the psychological testing, we make sure that our policing and our policemen or policewomen don't come from, a racist background or racist mentality that goes along with the psychological part of asking these provoking questions and the background checking to see, right? So then past that point where say, hey, maybe some people get through, we need to have an avenue or a system to give police officers without the kind of the connotation of being a police officer, but just knowing that they could go to someone as you would if you work in a company and go to HR and say, this is what's going on, and be anonymous. But in the policing, they don't have that opportunity because even from the top down to the bottom, it's, they don't want to turn on their brother. But we have to start from the inside out, because there are some good policemen out there. There are people out there who wear the badge, who want to uphold it. And we need to hold other people accountable who aren't doing right, so that we can weed out those things from the inside out.
Like a safe place for people to share what they feel is right and wrong, and not being judged, criticized, or almost more serious consequences. So and that happens in every organization. So every organization, every positive growing organization has a way for everyone to express freely and not be limited because of hierarchy or systems, but everyone is equal in terms of expressing and feel safe to say if there is something wrong, because that's when we could maximize the right. Because if someone knows there is something wrong, if it gets highlighted and solved for, then it helps maximize the right. So totally makes sense. Just towards the end, what we wanted to understand from you is the entire rebuilding our communities. What we feel has to be a people's movement. It can't be someone writing a check or a top-down order from the government. It has to be a people's movement where everyone feels and believes in helping, doing good. So wanted to understand, from you, what do you think about, volunteering and the role of celebrities to promote volunteerism? Would love to get your inputs.
Yeah, I think that as a celebrity or as somebody that's a person of interest, it's important to make sure that we promote and also engage people into volunteering in their own ways, and not necessarily. You don't have to always volunteer funds. People allocate volunteering their money to volunteering. But I think that you can also volunteer your time, also volunteer your own personal practices and things that you do to affect the people around you individually. if you don't want to be provoked or to try to go out and join a volunteering system that is robust or large, what people can do is to try to navigate this thing within, you know, because we do have a limited amount of people that we do talk to daily. And if someone would take it upon themselves to say, well, I know this person does have a position of power, but doesn't necessarily see this perspective. I think a part of that volunteering is to try to say and provoke a person to understand where other people are coming from. If you have that opportunity to know someone that does have that power to change things, you know, and so that's one aspect I feel like that people can, especially celebrities, because we know a lot of people who are in positions of power. And we know a lot of people who not necessarily could just write a check, but can impact people to make real change. And individually, and not just as a celebrity, it's upon ourselves to be a part of something. You know, you don't want to go through time and go through history and not say that you have a hand in trying to change the philosophy of our communities individually. You know, that is your personal obligation to do so. But if everybody had that perspective and had that mindset to want to volunteer their time and to volunteer their thoughts and try to help other people cultivate themselves to a better position, I think that overall, if we start internally in these communities, that we'll see a change across, you know, a larger landscape.
And I think you know, from a celebrity lens, and the volunteering of thought seems so valuable because of the scale, right? You know, you have so many people who you know, look up to you, and if you can create that you know, reawaken that humanity in those humans and get them to do the right thing, the power of the collective is so huge. So that can be very transformative.
So for instance, look at the movement that's happening with climate change. You know, I think that's universally, you know, something that either there's a lot of people who feel that the science isn't correct on that. And I feel like it's in the proof is there. You know, climate change is a real thing. If you recognize how the world is shifting and how it's been shifting over time. So, but what I bring that point up across is that there's people who are unifying on this topic across the world. And, you know, that is like a catalyst and a kind of a huge example of what volunteering and people, like, imagine how all these kids were going on strike from school across the world, you know, and we're not going to school because we want real climate change, because in 10 years, the planet is not going to be useful anymore. You know, and so if we had that kind of perspective on making changes in our communities and making changes to policing or making changes to you know, police reform and making changes to the way that we govern things, you know, or our education system, the things that people don't necessarily know that they have a opportunity to change. A lot of people don't know that they can go to their city and their town halls and ask their governors to ask them where money is going, you know, and if so we educate the community on what they can and can't do, it'll create a unity that'll provoke change. You know, a lot of times people don't know these things, so then they kind of end up knowing last minute. You know, we want to know where the funds are going, how much money is going towards the police, how much money is going towards the educational system, or you know, the rebuilding of the communities that are impoverished. You know what I mean? So that's a larger issue that individually people can change, you know, in their own communities.
And I think it relates also to the fact that you had mentioned right at the beginning that, you know, as some kids don't even know what is, you know, possible, and, you know, in the adult life, some citizens maybe don't even know what, you know, they can, you know, do if we get them to know and give them the right exposure, then, you know, it actually creates massive change. So, so, you know, concluding, just wanted to ask you, you know, what are the 3 words that, you know, come to your mind when you think about volunteering?
3 words that come to my mind. It's selfless. Selfless, meaning that it's probably the most selfless you could be is to volunteer your time, which is something we can't get back. You know, it's like the only thing that we can't really grasp and have forever.
Mm-hmm.
So that is like the ultimate respect and the ultimate gift that you can give somebody, is to volunteer your time and your effort. So selfless, I would say, is one. Change, I would say, is another. You know, and we need change in our communities, as we do over time. We don't keep the same technology for 10, 20 years. You know, we're not still walking around with a Nokia flip phone. I mean, some people do, you know what I mean? But the idea is that the same way we cultivate our technology and the way that we push that forward, we need to also push our philosophies forward and also push our agendas forward that are going to help our communities to be more acceptable and normalize a lot of things that are happening that kind of get pushed under the rug. So change, I would say, is one of them. And another word is unity. You know, I think that is probably the biggest form of unity that you could have. A lot of times people volunteer and they don't necessarily know the next person across from them, but it brings a group of people together that are like-minded, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of political stance. It brings people together on one topic. And I think that literally proves that we have the capability to live in unison. You know, if people can come together on one topic and volunteer, meaning giving their time without something back, it really proves that we can live this philosophy. We can live this way where we come together as people on one topic. We can do that across the board on things. I think it's just a matter of expressing that and exposing that to people.
No, those are, you know, real gems. You know, selfless, change, unity. You know, very powerful. So thanks a lot. You know, for joining us. You know, very insightful and thought-provoking discussion. And thank you so much for joining us.